Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Megan Roberts. A former Nunavut priest accused of sexually abusing children in the territory has died. Johannes Rivor died yesterday after a long illness, according to the Oblates of Mary Immaculate in Ottawa. Rivor is from France and worked in Nunavut in the 1960s and 70s. Juanita Taylor has the latest.
I can tell you that the Oblates of Mary Immaculate in Canada and in the province of France confirmed today that Johannes Rivor passed away yesterday on April 11th after a long illness. In a statement released today, it says that this news will be difficult for survivors and their families to hear. Those who have advocated for Rivor to face justice in Canada. It goes on to say that we sincerely regret that despite all their efforts, Rivor never made himself available and will never face the charges that were laid against him. We further regret that efforts for him to be formally removed as a priest were unsuccessful. Rivor spent about 30 years in Nunavut, mostly in Arvit and in Nauyat. Johannes Rivor was an oblate priest from France who had long faced allegations of sexually abusing children in Nunavut in the 1960s and 70s. Previous charges of sexual abuse were stayed in 2017 after the Crown decided that there was no prospect of conviction. Now, efforts have been made by advocates and by Inuit groups to bring Rivor back to Canada to face those charges in court, but those have been unsuccessful to date, including an extradition request. Now, last month, retired Quebec Judge Andre Saint-Denis released a report commissioned by the Canadian Oblates saying that he believes allegations made against Rivor of sexually abusing children in Nunavut are indeed true. There's been quite a bit of reaction online. People are surprised. People are disappointed that he did not return to Canada while he was still alive to face those charges. You know, at the time of his death, he was facing one charge of sexually abusing a girl in Nunavut, but you know, that number of alleged victims is certainly higher, including the late Marius Tungelik. He passed away 12 years ago. His friend, Jack Anak, spoke to CBC earlier today. Have a listen to what he had to say.
I think his victims will, in a way, feel like almost a sense of relief, but also sad that they were not able to get that justice of getting him tried and convicted, because I know at least one of his victims really wanted to go to France and face him face to face and look at him.
Rivor has denied all allegations of sexual abuse despite efforts to get him back to Canada to face those charges. He died yesterday without ever facing those charges. Rivor was at the age of 93 when he passed away yesterday.
That's Juanita Taylor reporting from Rankin Inlet. Now, you just heard from former Nunavut politician Jack Anak, who is a friend of one of Rivor's alleged victims. He says he's heard a mix of sadness and relief about the news. Here's more from him.
I think his victims will, in a way, feel like almost a sense of relief, but also sad that they were not able to get that justice of getting him tried and convicted, because I know at least one of his victims really wanted to go to France and face him face to face and look at him, and one of his others did go to France and faced him. So I think, in a way, it's a mixture of sadness and relief, I guess, in a way.
Do you think that with those feelings, either of them or both of them, is there any sense of closure here to this fight?
I think it will bring closure to them. Like, I know at least 3 of them who were his victims. I'm sure there's more. But at the same time, there will always be a sense of unfinished business of seeking justice. So I hope that they seek some help in dealing with it, because it's still a big issue for them. So I hope they seek some help for their mental state.
That was former Nunavut politician Jack Anak, a friend of some of Rivor's victims, more than one. We also heard from Liv Halsberg today. She's a human rights advocate from Belgium, and she fought for Rivor's extradition. She did not mince words when asked about how she feels about Rivor's death, or when she spoke about retired Judge Andre Denis' report into Rivor. That report found the allegations credible, but suggested that the Catholic Church was not aware of them. Take a listen.
The bastard had lived 12 years longer than our dear friend Marius. And I was glad he's finally dead. And I thought that this death suits the Oblates and their organization very well, because now they think that the whole issue is buried, can be buried with Rivor, but it is not. It is not. The report that they paid a respectable judge for Judge Denis was written to officialize their innocence, while these people are not innocent. They are very cruel. They have been very cruel for decades all over Canada. I think it is obvious. Everybody knows what happened in the residential schools, what happened outside the residential schools. That is just plain cruelty. And now they have paid the former judge to officialize their innocence. But people in Nunavut and elsewhere in Canada should not accept this falsification of history. We have to dig into documents and write a history exactly the way it happened, so that the truth can be brought to light, and only the truth can help the healing for the families and the communities.
That was Belgian human rights advocate Liv Halsberg. The Federal Minister of Defense says Arctic sovereignty and security isn't just about boats and planes patrolling the north. He says it's also about infrastructure like highways and airports. Bill Blair's statement comes just days after Ottawa announced it'll be spending $73 billion on defense in Canada over the next 2 decades. Some of that money aims to bolster the military's surveillance and combat capabilities in the Arctic. When asked what infrastructure is coming to the north, he didn't give specific details, but he did say consultations will be a determining factor.
Things we've talked about, for example, is the establishment of a new Arctic satellite base. We're also talking about the establishment of 5 new, what we call northern support hubs, that will enable the Canadian Armed Forces, first of all, to be persistently present in the Arctic, but also to be able to fly our new plane, because we're investing in new fighter aircraft, but also new submarine hunters and other transport aircraft to be able to bring them in and out. I want the Canadian Armed Forces to be able to train, to deploy, and to be present in the Arctic. And so we're building 5 new support hubs. And I can't tell you I can't tell you precisely where they'll be, because I've also undertaken to the Premier's Inuit and Indigenous leadership and in northern communities that one of the things they've said to us is nothing about us without us. And so I've undertaken that we'll consult with them. We'll work together to determine where those investment in infrastructure needs to take place, and what type of infrastructure will be required, not only to support the interests and the requirements of the Canadian Armed Forces, but the communities in which they'll be located.
Blair also says he'd like to invest and expand the Arctic Rangers, and that he's talked to the territorial premiers about creating new reserve capabilities. He says ultimately the most important place the Canadian military will work is in the Arctic. You can listen to that full interview with the CBC's Hilary Bird on Monday's Trailbreaker in the NWT and on the CBC Listen app. It was a powerful moment at the Yukon River panel in Anchorage, Alaska this week. Much of the conversation is about Canada and Alaska reaching a 7-year moratorium on Chinook fishing. And when one young Yukoner got her chance to speak, she talked about the power of salmon and how Indigenous health depends on it. Here's Nika Silverfox Young of the Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation.
The catastrophic decline of Yukon River salmon species means that all the traditional knowledge that would have been passed down to my generations and the ones that come after me mean we do not fully understand the relationship with the salmon that swim in our DNA. My father's ancestral roots come from Newfoundland, Canada. Growing up, he has made sure I knew and understood the importance of what it means to lose our fish. With the decline and crash of the cod stocks in his lifetime, he felt it was very important that I learn these exact same things that are going on in my lifetime. Growing up, I was taught how to process fish, but not the traditional trainings or the cultural protocols that go with it. I was not taught how to make the strips and holes required for gun for dry fish, or how to hang them in the smokehouses, or why it is the way it's done. Growing up, we did have salmon, but unfortunately I was too young to learn how to cut, and I was always told next year. Sadly, as the years have progressed, less and less fish have showed up in our nets, and I was not taught these life-saving skills. I know how to cut and I know how to process fish, but I do not understand the importance and the cultural protocols behind why we do these things. These are the skills I want to revitalize and bring back to my communities and my future generations. Will I still be Danki? These are the questions that swim through my mind now. The loss of our salmon is catastrophic to my people and to my Yukon. Due to climate change and high seas fishings in the oceans, the low return of spawning adults have greatly impacted Indigenous peoples all along the Yukon River, who used to heavily rely on the seasonal diet for generations. With each year that passes that we do not have the ability to harvest the fish that my ancestors have lived off for time immemorial, we will face more issues like sickness, such as diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's, and dementia. We now rely on fish that comes from other communities, or fish that has been farmed, or on food that comes from a grocery store instead of our lands, which is wrapped in plastic with all the life and essence taken out. Our youth and children are able to identify big logos instead of the traditional plants that we used to harvest for time immemorial. Our nutrient return is dwindling lower and lower, and we are starting to see the devastating impacts of losing our fish. Soon, our animal kin will start to feel it as well. When we are able to harvest the salmon that swim in our DNA, our beautiful fish camps brought our families and our people together. Without these camps, we will lose what it means to be Danki and the important family traditions and time spent together on the land. Now our fish camps are empty, a former shell of what once was great. The ghosts of generations of salmon swim through my nets now. If we do not act immediately, the salmon that swim in our DNA will go to sleep forever. To stave my fears as well as the youths, we need to bring them home to their streams where our children of tomorrow can continue our traditions and thrive along with our fish.
That was Nika Silverfox Young, a citizen of the Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation. She was speaking this week at the Yukon River panel meetings in Anchorage. Could Lake Energy Corporation is increasing its net metering program's maximum capacity. Customers can now generate 15 kilowatts per hour in their homes. That's a jump from 10 kilowatts. The program allows residential customers to generate their own electricity from renewable energy systems. The surplus of energy goes back to QEC's grid. This gives the customer an energy credit that helps offset their electricity bills. Bert Rose installed 10 solar panels on his house in Iqaluit. He says he's been saving $1,000 a year since he installed them.
And of course, that $1,000 a year, in that 2-year period, the cost of electricity has also gone up. So our initial investment 2 years ago is paying back at a higher rate than we thought it was when we took the plunge and spent the money to install solar panels on our house.
The program is only available to residential customers and 2 municipal corporations per community. Programs such as Sanikiluak's wind power project would be eligible for the credit. The NWT Power Corporation's initial estimate of a 20% rate decrease for Hay River is now in question. The Power Corp said rates would drop by that amount if it supplied power to the community instead of Northland Utilities. Hay River applied to have NTPC take over, and the Public Utility Board approved the transfer last month. But now, the community has to wait until the end of the year to see if that 20% drop will actually happen.
We do have to go through the total or the general rate application now to come up with the rate that the Utilities Board will approve. And I'm sure you're aware that a general rate application is a large undertaking. Our last application was probably 1,000 pages long, so it's a pretty significant document that needs to be created. And at the same time, NUL will have to do their own. And I think the Public Utilities Board will be looking at these both at the same time. They provided a time frame of December 31st, 2024 for submission, and that's a fairly aggressive time frame, but we'll be working towards meeting that time frame.
Grant says the outcome of the general rate application could affect power rates across the NWT, but they won't know what that looks like until the applications are done.
Priya doesn't love exercising, but loves the way it makes her feel. Max doesn't love cooking, but loves homemade meals with his kids. Paul doesn't love doing his taxes, but loves getting the benefits and credits he qualified for. Learn more about benefits and credits like the GST HST credit and Canada Workers Benefit at canada.ca/every dollar counts. A message from the Government of Canada.
What does it take to reach the top? Join me, Ian Hannamansing, as I get to know some truly inspirational people who share the secrets of their success.
If you want to talk about one moment, it's a moment where I would live or die.
It changed everything on CBC News Explore.
Moments that are so on trend right now. Ticket pricing, artificial intelligence, being a Swiftie, wild fashion trends, showbiz, and cancel culture. Join me, Alameen Abdul-Mahmoud, for Commotion, available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sipping on a bit of Henny, can I get a little Remy? Feeling heavy, chilling but I'm feeling ready. Pulled up in a big old Chevy.
The federal government announced new parts of its housing plan today, focusing on getting rental homes built. Justin Trudeau also threw down the gauntlet for provinces and municipalities, saying they need to do their part. Rafi Boudjikanian has that story.
We are releasing the most comprehensive and ambitious housing plan ever seen.
Federal governments have seldom built housing strategies in this country. This is Justin Trudeau's second shot at it. Years ago, he focused on affordable housing. Now, with skyrocketing monthly mortgage and rent payments, Ottawa has rental housing in its crosshairs.
We're going to do that by reducing the cost of home building, by putting tax incentives on the table for builders, low-cost financing. We're also going to be launching new measures that help unlock federal lands.
The government's launching $15 billion in more loans, the goal to spur the construction of at least 30,000 new rental units over the next year. And some of that will be on public lands, the government opening up its own portfolio for either sale or lease.
We're seeing language and a scale of an initiative that I've never seen before.
The financing amounts and opening up of more land will start putting a dent in the housing gap, this developer says, and more rental units will improve the overall market.
The risk, of course, is that rental housing is so incredibly expensive that there's nothing left at the end of the month to start saving for a down payment. So having a little bit of a surplus or oversupply of rental housing would be really good.
But as Ottawa muscles in on turf it does not usually touch, some are crying foul.
They've swooped in and they've got a special deal with Edmonton, a special deal with Calgary. They've handpicked 6 different municipalities to work directly with and left over 340 other municipalities out in the cold. We just don't think that's fair.
Trudeau was hammered months ago for saying housing is not a primarily federal responsibility. He's now pushing back.
Provinces should be careful what they wish for. They want the federal government to fix this housing crisis? We are. We will. We are there to work hand in full respect with those provinces who want to solve the problem and ask those provinces that don't want to solve the problem to just get out of the way.
Ultimately, though, it's consistent messaging on cost of living issues from the federal Conservatives that's pushed the government to act on housing policies. The Liberals' electoral fortunes have yet to improve in opinion polls. The budget next week might be their biggest test yet. Rafi Wijikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
A health clinic that's the first of its kind opened in Montreal. It's providing family health care in a way that's culturally safe for Indigenous people. Rowan Kennedy was there.
This clinic hopes to weave Indigenous culture with health. It has 2 nurses and a doctor, and even hosts art workshops.
We do a lot of events where all of our community can come together, meet, hang out, eat, have fun.
The family clinic opened last November and has 100 patients. It's run by Native Montreal and the Health Authority for South Central Montreal. The Health and Indigenous Relations Ministers attended the official opening ceremony.
We can't work in silos. We need to work together. And this is a strong message.
The principle of proximity and the principle of navigator is, I think, the secret weapon here.
The role of the health navigator was created after the Viens Commission and Joyce Echaquan's death. They help guide people through Quebec's multi-layered and complicated medical system.
They have a lack of trust in the health system. I think that would be the biggest problem.
Rachel Albert is the clinic's navigator. She says Indigenous people's concerns are not always heard in a traditional healthcare environment.
There's patients who have come here completely super anxious, very worried, and who have left smiling and have been like, I've never had a doctor listen to me properly.
Half of Quebec's Indigenous population lives in urban centres. More than 35,000 people with Indigenous ancestry live near Montreal. The clinic only sees people with Indian status cards. Rowan Kennedy, CBC News, Montreal.
Elders in Iqaluit had the chance to show traditional fashion yesterday during Iqaluit's Tunic Time Festival, but it was made in an untraditional way. Carl Cardinal explains.
Elders revealed their creations. Using traditional knowledge, they designed outfits made from scratch, with only garbage bags and tape. Giuseppe Canayok has made parka with sealskin before, but says that this was more difficult.
We're using just garbage bag and tape, and the tape attached really fast. You gotta be patient with it, along with you gotta be patient with sealskin and the material. This one is the most difficult that I made parka out of, garbage bags.
One elder was inspired by a design her family used to make. Anitem Shenson teach people how to make amauti with more traditional fabrics. She says the soft fabric was difficult to work with, but adds she was happy with the final result. Her orange amauti won first place.
Since I'm a little girl, my grandmother or my mom used to have a amauti like that, the square one on the bottom. Mm-hmm. And I always want to have, I never make like that yet, and I make the different amautis. Now I can use my pattern. That one I using them winning. I'm making the same.
Moati Matiusi worked at the Elders Center and says she was very impressed with the participants' work. She says the elder didn't use pattern. Their outfit came to life from their years of experience.
Oh, it was awesome, and they're very creative, and they didn't use any. They did it from their mind, so it came out the way they wanted to see them.
This is just one of the events from the Tunic Time Festival. It's wrapping up this weekend, and organizers are already looking forward to the 60th anniversary next year. Elders will have to create parka again, but with more traditional fabric. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
One of the biggest races in Nunavut is returning next week. This year's Nunavut Quest is starting on Monday. The race is expected to last 9 days, weather permitting. 12 teams will make the trek from Arctic Bay to Pond Inlet. There are teams from both communities as well as Iqaluit. The director of Inuit Programs and Services at the Kikitani Inuit Association says the ice conditions are good, but there is concern about deep snow near the finish line in Pond Inlet. The winner of the race will get $20,000. The last 6 finishers will receive $2,000. Arctic Bay and Pond Inlet will host feasts and other celebrations throughout the race. And that is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. We leave you with a performance from 7-year-old Letty Kiasuk. Her and her mother are Inuvialuit drum dancers in Inuvik. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
I'm such a fan of this show.
Listen to the podcast Q with Tom Power.
The story itself is so unbelievable.
The industry wasn't set up for me to thrive in.
The presence I feel now is not something that I believed to be possible in the past.
So many people thought I couldn't do it. They doubted me.
Felt like I ripped my whole heart out.
I didn't realize how formative 25 to 30 would be.
I have to kind of repress my own self-doubt.
You're one of my favorite interviewers, so I was pumped.
Get out of here.
Q with Tom Power. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.
What does it take to reach the top? Meet some truly inspirational people as they share the challenges and secrets of their success. It changed everything on CBC News Explore.